I was getting home late at night, and I had called a cab because I didn't feel like driving. But as I looked at the driver through the app, I noticed that the picture didn't match the actual person. I looked over at him and I could tell that he was looking at me, but I tried not to make eye contact. I asked him how long he had been driving for this company and where he was from. The driver responded in a monotone voice and told me that he had been working there for 3 years and that he lived in the city. His answers were short and to the point, and he didn't seem to want to talk to me anymore after that. The door wouldn't open. I tried again, but it was still stuck. I looked back at the driver and asked him to unlock the door so I could get out. But he just stared at me blankly and continued to sit there. My mind was racing, trying to come up with a plan to escape. But before I could think of anything, the driver spoke again. Before I could even process what he was saying, the driver shifted gears and started driving away from my house. He seemed kind of creepy and he kept glancing at me while he was driving. During that time, I tried everything I could think of to escape. There was a moment of silence before he spoke again. "Get out," he said. His voice was still low and raspy, but now there was a hint of urgency in it. I kicked at the doors, but they were locked. I tried to roll down the window, but it was jammed. But for me, that feeling has become a part of my everyday life. But as I grew older, I tried to put it out of my mind and just get on with my life. For example, when I was younger, my dad would always yell at me for no reason. Fie. She was so concerned with what other people thought of her that she would never stand up for me when I needed it the most. I remember times when I would come home from school with bruises and cuts, and my mum would just ask me why I had gotten into a fight. For the first time, I was able to talk about what was happening to me and actually feel like someone understood. I learned that the trauma I had experienced as a child had left scars that ran deep. It had affected my relationships, my work, and my overall well-being. But the most important thing I learned was that I wasn't alone. There were millions of other people who had gone through similar experiences and come out stronger on the other side. I have a career that I enjoy, and friends who make me laugh. But I know that my journey is far from over. There are still days when the anxiety and fear creep back in, but I have the tools and support I need to manage it. The therapist helped me develop coping mechanisms to deal with the anxiety and fear that had become such a big part of my life. If you're struggling, please know that there is help available. Reach out to a mental health professional today and take the first step towards a brighter tomorrow. You deserve it. But even with therapy, it was hard. There were days when I felt like I just couldn't take it anymore. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of anxiety. And there was no life raft in sight, for she never asked the important question. She never tried to find out who had hurt me or why. Instead, she would just give me a lecture about how fighting wouldn't solve anything. I started sharing my story and listening to theirs. And in doing so, I realized that healing was possible. I also began to explore alternative therapies such as yoga and meditation. These practices helped me connect with my body and emotions in a healthy way, and gave me the tools to manage my anxiety. And then she would send me to my room without even offering me a Band-Aid. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but it was also the best decision I ever made. I no longer had to worry about their approval or fear their anger. I was free. I felt like I was living in a nightmare. My own parents, the people who were supposed to love and protect me, were the ones causing me the most pain. It didn't matter what I did, I could never do anything right in his eyes. When I was 16, my dad lost his job, and the financial strain caused him to become even more abusive. It got to the point where I was so scared of him that I would hide in my room for days at a time. I couldn't take the yelling, the hitting, the constant criticism anymore. I just wanted to get away from it all. He would find fault with everything I did and would never hesitate to let me know how disappointed he was in me. Of course, I tried to please him, but no matter what I did, it was never enough. It got to the point where I was so anxious around him that I couldn't even look him in the eye. I was constantly worried about what he might say or do next. And that anxiety would just build up inside of me until I felt like I was going to explode. No matter what I did, that feeling of dread always followed me. I even tried to take the keys out of the ignition, but they were stuck. I was trying to ignore it, but it was making me uncomfortable. I tried to scream, but my voice wouldn't come out. I could feel tears streaming down my face, but I refused to let them fall. I was terrified. Finally, I would be able to get away from this driver and his eerie presence. I didn't dare look back to see if he was following me. Why did he try to keep me in the car? And why did he engage the child's safety locks? I will never know the answers to those questions, but I can't help but shudder at the thought of what could have happened to me if I had you and I just kept running until I reached a place where I felt safe. However, as we pulled up to the curb in front of my house, I realized that my relief was premature. I thought nothing of it, so I just decided to get in the car and go home. As we drove off, I was sitting in the front seat next to the driver, and there was no one else in the car. I was safe, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just escaped something terrible. After a few minutes of silence, I decided to break it. I tried to take my mind off the situation by focusing on the road ahead of us. But every time I looked over at the driver, his eyes were on me. I tried to open the other door, but it was also locked. In a panic, I reached for the child's safety lock button and tried to push it in. To my horror, it was already engaged. The driver turned his head slowly towards me and a twisted smile appeared on his face. I could feel my heart racing in my chest as I realized that I was trapped in this car with a stranger. It was unsettling, to say the least. And I couldn't help but wonder why he wasn't paying attention to the road. As we approached my house, I began to feel a sense of relief. When I opened the door to get out, I noticed something strange. At this point, I began to panic. What was going on? Why wouldn't the door open? Then suddenly, I remembered something that might help me escape the situation. In a low, raspy voice, he said, "Where do you think you're going?" I froze in my seat and couldn't respond. "You can't leave yet," he said. "We have somewhere else to go." At this point, I knew that I was in grave danger. The driver continued to drive for what felt like hours, but in reality was probably only a few minutes. Finally, the car came to a stop, and the driver turned off the engine. I hesitated for a moment, but then I got out of the car and ran away as fast as I could. When I finally stopped and turned around, I saw that he was nowhere to be found. To this day, I still wonder what that driver's real intentions were. What did he want with me? If you've ever been in a situation where you felt like you were in danger, then you know that feeling of fear and uncertainty. It all started when I was just a child. I remember always feeling on edge, waiting for something bad to happen. It was you and until I grew up and moved out of my parents' house that I realized just how much their actions had affected me. But it wasn't just my dad. My mom was just as bad. But as time went on, things just got worse. That's when I started seeing a therapist. It worn until I learned about trauma and how it affects people that I truly understood why I was feeling this way. I began to attend support groups and reached out to other survivors of childhood abuse. But perhaps the most important step I took was to cut ties with my toxic family. Today, I am in a much better place. I have a loving partner who supports me and encourages me to be the best version of myself. My story is one of hope. It is a testament to the human spirit's ability to heal and overcome even the darkest of time. I got in the car, and within seconds I heard my phone vibrate on the seat beside me. I reached over and grabbed it. It was a text from the Uber driver letting me know that he was parked outside. I quickly opened the car door and slid in, buckled my seatbelt and stared at the back of the driver's head. I realized he was actually paying any attention to me. P kept his eyes forward on the road ahead, never glancing over to check if I was all right or asking me where I wanted to go. All of the road signs had been facing the wrong way. I rattled the handle, tried the window, but it was shut tight. Trapped inside, I knew that the driver was watching me, even though he didn't turn back to look at me. I broke into a run after him, my feet pounding on the ground, trying to catch up. As I ran, I heard the sounds of the forest all around me. Owls hooted, crickets chirped, and the wind rustled through the leaves. But above all, I heard his voice echoing through the trees, calling my name. I didn't want to go any further, but I couldn't bring myself to stop. I had to keep running. And then I saw it, a faint glow in the distance. As I drew closer, the light grew brighter, revealing a small clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a large oak tree, its branches gnarled and twisted like the bones of some ancient creature. Beneath the tree was a circle of stones, and inside the circle was a fire pit, and sitting around it were for people. I could feel his eyes boring into the back of my skull. The taller man was one of them. He beckoned for me to come closer. One of the other people stood up and walked over to me. She had a kind face with crinkled eyes that twinkled like stars. "Welcome," she said, her voice like warm honey. "We've been expecting you." The man smiled at me, his teeth long and sharp like a wolf's. "Join us," he said, "and we'll tell you a story." They all sat back down, leaving a space for me next to the man who had greeted me. I hesitated, unsure of what to do. And that's when I heard a familiar sound, the rumble of a car engine. A car, horn blared, pin, and I saw headlights cutting through the darkness. The driver was leaning out of the window, his face pale and worried. "Hey, what are you doing here?" Why did you get out of the car?" he shouted. "Come back, please." I wanted to answer him, to explain everything, but no sound came out of my mouth. I tried to move, to call out to him, but I couldn't. I was frozen in place, unable to speak or move. The car pulled away slowly, its lights fading into the darkness as it went. I turned back to the man who had led me into the clearing. His smile was wider now, and his eyes gleamed with excitement. "Shall we begin?" he asked. I turned away, hiding my face in my hands. I closed my eyes, trying to think of a way out. That's when I heard it. A noise unlike anything I've ever heard before. It sounded like someone had dropped a piano on a tin roof, then dragged the piano across concrete. And then came another sound, a thump, like something heavy hitting the ground. Boom. But it wasn't just a single thump. It was followed by another, and then another. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the window and peered out. The driver had stopped the car, and standing beside it, silhouetted against the moonlight, was a tall, thin figure. Its head was bent down, and I could see it taking something out of the trunk of the car. The thing stood back up straight and turned to face me. I recoiled in my seat as I watched it walk away from the car. It was carrying something with it, something that was dragging along the ground. When I had been looking at them before, I hadn't noticed because we'd been traveling in the correct direction. But now we were going the wrong way. There were no street lamps on this road, no houses, nothing. All I could see were the trees on either side of the road, their branches reaching out like arms towards us. As we drove deeper into the darkness, I began to panic. Where was this road going? How much longer would it be before we reached the end? And then what? They were all going in the opposite direction to the way that we were heading, but they seemed to be moving so slowly compared to us. We were flying down this empty road. I tried to remember how long it took to get to my destination on public transport. Then he beckoned to me, motioning for me to follow. Part of me wanted to run, to lock myself inside that car and wait for whoever that man was to leave. Something in his eyes, something in his smile made me trust him. I unlocked the door and climbed out of the car. The ground was soft beneath my feet, like walking on a cloud. The air hung heavy with the smell of pine needles and damp earth. We walked in silence for what felt like hours. The taller man didn't seem to be in a rush. He walked slowly, taking deep breaths, and as if he was enjoying the fresh air. Occasionally he'd stop and point to different things around us, but I couldn't see what he was pointing at. My eyes struggled to pierce the gloom and realized that it would take us around 20 minutes to get there. But we were already halfway there. The driver must have noticed me staring because he turned to me again. "What are you thinking?" he asked. I looked away, not wanting him to see how scared I was. "I was just thinking we're nearly there," I lied. Boom! He smiled again, and I could feel goosebumps prickling across my skin. I didn't want to smile, but it was only when I looked down at my phone that I realized the notification from Uber still sitting on the screen was for a trip that was scheduled to start in about 20 minutes. I turned to the driver. I think there's been a mistake. You weren't supposed to pick me up for another 20 minutes. The driver finally turned to me and I saw that he was smiling. Oh, no mistake, he said, reaching out to grab my phone. You were supposed to get in my car a long time ago. Before I could stop him, he swiped through my apps, looking at my pictures and reading my texts. I pushed his hand away from my phone. You don't have permission to do that, I said. Now put me back on the main road. I can cancel the fare. He laughed, a low rumble in his chest that sounded like rocks tumbling down a hill. Then he turned back to the road and carried on driving. I watched the other cars on the road whizzing by. When I eventually worked up the courage to look back at the road, I realized that something was wrong. I needed to get out of that car, but the doors were locked. The driver turned to me and gave me a big grin. He opened the car door and stepped out. Suddenly, he quickened his pace and started jogging down a path. As soon as they saw me, they all turned to stare. My mum always tells me to stop taking Ubers so late at night, but sometimes I just can't help it. It's like when you're out with friends and they want to go to another bar, but you're already drunk and you just want to go home. So my boss made me stay around until all the prescription refill phone calls were done for the day. I decided to get an Uber, and I input my address. The driver was a guy named Joe, and he seemed nice enough. So, the next morning, I woke up and I couldn't get the events from the night before off of my mind. Well, it was a dark green color, and I distinctly remembered throwing out the green cover, because I wanted a new one, but now it had a brand new dark green cover on it. I knew this man. I've seen him before, but I couldn't remember where. I decided to pay my neighbor a visit. I knocked on her door, and she answered. I asked her if she recognized the man in the photo, and she said yes. She said she saw him driving by every day. But what really stood out to her was his license plate. She said it was a fake temporary tag, and it belonged to a rental car. I was so confused. Why would a rental car company rent him a car without plate? Did he steal it? Is he a serial killer? A million thoughts ran through my head. I racked my brain trying to figure out who he was. I explained everything to them and they said they'd look into it, but I could tell they didn't believe me. The next day I checked the app and I found a message from Joe. It said, "Sorry, it's been a rough week. I'm hoping a good tip will turn my luck around. Thanks again for riding with me." I was so scared I blocked him, and then it hit me. One of my neighbors had a Ring doorbell camera, and she told me that every time someone rings her doorbell, it takes a picture. I packed up my stuff and I moved in with my mom. It's been 3 months since then, and I still don't know what happened. Sometimes I randomly get a notification from the app, and it LLB, a new driver, asking me to rate my ride with him. And every time I do, I pray that it's not him. I checked my phone and I found the photo she sent me when I moved in. I held the photo in one hand and the video in the other, and I stared at them. It was definitely him. He was the same exact man. Peeve. He was my neighbor. Then I walked down the hallway, and I saw my bedroom door. Bah! As I got closer, I started to feel a chill go down my spine. My bedroom walls were a deep red, and I had them painted white exactly 1 year ago, and now they were red again. I was so freaked out at this point, I didn't know what to do. I tried to shake it off and told myself that I was just tired and I was letting my imagination run wild. To my surprise, I hadn't left him a rating. I checked my messages with him, and everything was normal. No creepy comments or anything. But then I remembered something. I had a dash cam in my car. I ran outside and I got into my car and reviewed the footage from the night before. I checked the time, and it was right when he dropped me off. And that's when I saw it. The moment he dropped me off, he got out of his car to see if I made it to my door safely. I rewound it and I watched it again. He was standing there watching me walk into my house, and it was the last thing he did before driving away. Then I walked into my kitchen, and that's when it hit me. I had never painted the walls in my kitchen yellow. I always liked the gray color they were. But when I looked around the kitchen, I noticed that the walls weren't gray anymore. They were a pale yellow. I shrugged it off and thought maybe I was just misremembering the color. But then I started noticing other things. He was a little bit older, and I could tell he was married, because he had a wedding ring, and a picture of his family was on his dashboard. He also kept trying to make conversation with me, but I was exhausted and I really just wanted to go home and sleep. So I gave him one-word answer. He finally stopped trying to talk to me, and we pulled up to my house. I thanked him and got out. We finally got the call center lady off the phone, and my shift ended at 12:58. And let me tell you, our parking lot is not the nicest place to be walking through by yourself at night. There's these tall, dark trees that surround the parking lot, and the street lights do uneven work most of the time. Not to mention the back alley behind our pharmacy leads to the train tracks. And people use it as kind of like a shortcut, which means you might run into God knows what back there after midnight. Needless to say, I was very happy to get into my car and drive home. But this one particular night was different. It would change my life forever. I had just gotten off work and was heading home. It was around 1 a.m., and I worked in a hospital pharmacy. The thing about living in the suburbs is there isn't any public transportation available. So I have no choice but to take an Uber or a Lyft. As soon as I started walking towards my front door, I realized something. My driver, Joe, had sent me a message on the app asking me to rate him, and it said, "Hope you enjoyed the ride. By the way, you have a lovely house here." It reminded me of where I grew up. I didn't think much of it, and I rated him a 5-star and went inside. It wasn't until later that night that I realized how wrong I was. In my living room, I had this giant beanbag chair that I loved. I ran to my phone, and I opened up the app to check the rating. I left Joe the night before. There was something strange about him. I paused the video and took a close look. I was so scared. Why was my Uber driver spying on me? What was he doing, standing outside my house? And why did he seem so familiar? I went back home and I called the police. I couldn't live in that house anymore.